She married him for her dying father's last wish, a cold billionaire with a broken past. He only wanted a name, a contract, control. But what neither expected was that behind the lies and legal documents, something real would bloom. Vulnerability, trust, and love. Through betrayal, grief, and war against powerful enemies, Arya and Julian fought not just for survival, but for each other. Who were they before love changed everything? And will choosing love set them free? Or destroy them? Where are you watching from? Drop your city below and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories like this. Julian Hale was the kind of man who didn't just walk into a room, he took it over. His presence was like gravity, cold, inescapable, commanding. At 28, he wasn't just rich, he was powerful in ways few understood. CEO of Hale Tech, the world's largest AI conglomerate, Julian could silence rooms, shatter companies, and seduce investors with a single look. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, he was in the penthouse suite of the Apollo Hotel, shirt half open, lips pressed to the collarbone of a woman he couldn't name. She moaned softly beneath him, her fingers tangled in his hair, legs wrapped around him like ivy. "Harder, Julian," she breathed, her voice the kind of whisper that made lesser men crumble. He didn't stop, didn't speak. He never did during these encounters. Words were for transactions. This, whatever it was, didn't require talking. Just bodies, motion, and the illusion of connection. When he finally collapsed beside her, chest rising and falling like he'd just run a marathon, he stared at the ceiling, blank and disconnected. "That was incredible," the girl cooed, running her fingers down his chest, playful. "Round 4? He grunted. "No names, no cuddling, no round 4. That was the rule." She pouted. "You're always like this?" "Like what?" He muttered, already grabbing for his phone on the nightstand. Detached. He didn't answer. Because she wasn't wrong. Every night was the same. Club, drink, a girl who wanted a taste of power, a suite with marble floors and Egyptian cotton, then a wad of cash and a silent exit. He never remembered their names. He didn't want to. Julian Hale didn't do intimacy. He did control. Control was clean, safe. Feelings, though? Feelings were messy. And Julian hated messy. His phone buzzed in his hand. He glanced at the screen. His jaw tightened. "Dad." He ignored it. It rang again. "Let it ring," the girl murmured, dragging her fingers lower. But he pushed her hand away and answered. Because Julian Hale never ignored his father. "What?" he snapped, voice cold. "I want you home in 15 minutes, Everett Hale barked. Julian rolled his eyes. "What now? I'm busy. I know exactly how you're wasting your time. Get your ass home, or I swear I'll make sure you never waste it that way again." The line went dead. Julian cursed under his breath. His father had always had a way of ruining everything, even sex. "What happened?" the girl asked, pulling the sheet around her. He stood up and began dressing without a word. "Will I see you again?" He glanced at her once, head to toe, then tossed a thick envelope onto the bed. "Never." He left the suite and took the express elevator down to the underground parking garage. His driver was already waiting, doors open, engine running. No one kept the Hale heir waiting. Except, of course, his father. The drive to the Hale estate was swift and silent. The city blurred by, a mix of lights and movement, but Julian didn't look out the window. His mind was already at war with whatever confrontation awaited. Funny how the world bowed to him. Billionaires, presidents, royalty, but one man still controlled him like a puppet on strings, Everett Hale. The man who had built the Hale empire from the ground up, who had once told Julian, "You don't inherit power, you earn the right to wield it." Julian had done just that, tripled company profits in under 4 years, became the youngest CEO in tech history to break the $1 trillion ceiling. But no matter how high he climbed, he was still a son first, a son never really free. He entered the estate without knocking, bypassed the butlers, and stormed straight into his father's office. The old man was pacing. "What the hell is so urgent?" Julian demanded. Everett turned, his gaze as sharp as ever. "Don't move, just listen." Julian folded his arms, waiting. "Your wedding is next week." Julian blinked. "Excuse me?" "You're getting married, I've already given my word." "To who?" "Patrick Bennett's daughter." Julian scoffed. "Arya Bennett? The girl who wore overalls to church and used to cry when she lost at chess?" "She's not a girl anymore," his father said sharply. "And Patrick is dying. He asked me to care for her. I gave him my word." "You gave your word to ruin my life?" Everett didn't flinch. I'm giving you a chance to fix it. I don't need fixing. You're spiraling, Julian. You treat women like disposable napkins. The media caught you again last night. It's trending. I don't care. Well, I do. You represent more than just yourself. You represent my legacy, and I'm tired of cleaning up after you. Julian's voice turned to ice. So your solution is to tie me to a broke librarian with daddy issues? Arya's not broke. She's educated, humble, and stronger than you think. She's exactly what you need. Julian laughed bitterly. What I need is freedom, not another chain. You'll regret not marrying her. I'm in love with Lana. Everett's eyes narrowed. The same Lana who cheats on you with your CFO, who flirts with waiters when your back's turned? That's not love. You wouldn't know what love is, Julian shot back. You and Mom built a company, not a marriage. That hit hard. Everett looked away. A silence fell. Then the old man said, Fine, one solution, 1 year, a contract marriage. If you're still incompatible after that, walk away. But treat her right. If you don't, I'll donate my remaining shares to charity. Julian froze. His throat tightened. Your choice, his father said, already walking away. Julian stood alone in that massive, gold-trimmed room, caged by options. Marry a girl he barely remembered, or lose everything he'd fought to build? He thought of Lana, of the life they'd planned. But even in that thought, something stung. Lana didn't want him. She wanted the crown he wore. And Arya? She was just a relic of his past. A sweet, awkward girl with crooked pigtails and a laugh that used to echo in his ears when they played hide-and-seek. He hadn't seen her in years, not since she was 12. But if she was still that girl, soft, fragile, obedient, maybe he could bend her to his terms. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad. Maybe. Meanwhile, across the city, Arya Bennett stood in her father's study, arms crossed, eyes stormy. I won't marry him, she said, her voice firm. Why not, Arya? Patrick Bennett asked, his voice lined with weariness. Because he's a monster. A cold, arrogant, self-absorbed narcissist. Patrick gave a weak chuckle. So dramatic. I'm serious. You two used to be inseparable. We were kids. I was 10. He was 13. We didn't even know what life was. But you loved him. No, I admired him. There's a difference. Then he left for boarding school and never looked back. Patrick reached for her hand. He was protective of you. Obsessively so, Arya whispered. He didn't let any boy near me, not even Leo. I remember, you cried for days when he left. Arya looked away. She hated that memory. The empty backyard swing, the chessboard left half-played. Now Julian was a man, dangerous, unreachable, and she was nothing. Just a girl with student loans and a dying father. Sweetheart, her father said softly, I don't have much time. She turned sharply. Don't say that. It's the truth. The doctors gave me 6 months. I've used up 3. Tears welled in her eyes. I want to see you settled, safe, loved. Julian doesn't love me. He doesn't even remember me. I believe he will, in time. He's the richest man in the world, Dad. He doesn't believe in love. You'd be surprised what people like him are capable of when someone dares to see beyond the mask. Arya sat beside him, resting her head on his shoulder. I'm scared. I know, but you're strong. You've always been. And so, just like that, 2 broken people were pushed toward a contract they didn't choose. One out of duty, one out of desperation. Neither aware that their childhood connection would be reignited. Not by convenience, but by fire. A fire that would burn pride, pain, and everything in between. The day of the wedding approached like a slow-burning fuse, hissing closer and closer to a spark that neither Julian nor Arya wanted to ignite. And yet, the preparations moved forward with chilling efficiency. Mr. Everett Hale had spared no expense. Florists from Italy, a dressmaker from Paris, and an exclusive hotel venue locked down tighter than a royal palace. The entire event was staged to look like a union of love and legacy. But underneath the silks and crystal chandeliers was a pair of unwilling hearts tied together by obligation. Arya sat on the dressing room chair, her reflection staring back with wide, uncertain eyes. Her gown, though stunning, felt foreign on her body, like someone else's dream sewn onto her skin. It was a soft ivory satin, with delicate lace trailing along the neckline and sleeves. Elegant, expensive, empty. Hazel, her best friend and sole bridesmaid, paced in the background, chewing on the end of a makeup brush. You look like a porcelain princess, Hazel said finally. Except you're frowning like you're heading to your execution. I am, Arya replied dryly, only with better lighting. Hazel crouched beside her, tugging gently at her hand. Listen, 1 year. That's it. A fake marriage. You've survived worse. You lived with dorm roaches in college, remember? Roaches didn't have six-pack abs and superiority complexes. Hazel snorted. True, but this six-pack probably has a closet full of Armani and a jet that can fly you far away from your problems. I don't want his money, Arya whispered. Hazel sobered. I know, that's why you're different. That's why, maybe, just maybe, this won't be all bad. Arya didn't answer. She simply turned back to the mirror, trying to anchor herself in the image of the woman she used to be. Before deals, before threats, before Julian Hale. A knock interrupted her thoughts. It's time, a voice said through the door. She stood, legs shaking beneath layers of silk, heart pounding in a rhythm that sounded more like retreat than progress. Meanwhile, on the opposite end of the hall, Julian stood like a statue in front of the full-length mirror in his suite. His tuxedo was tailored so sharply it could cut glass. He looked every inch the Hale heir, tall, devastatingly handsome, cold as steel. Peter, his longtime best friend and best man, adjusted his cufflinks beside him. You know, Peter said casually, you could still run. Julian didn't smile. And lose the company? The board? Everything I built? Maybe some things are worth more than a boardroom. Julian turned, expression like stone. This isn't about love, Peter. It's a transaction. Peter's smile faltered. That's what you keep telling yourself. Julian didn't answer. He adjusted his tie and walked to the door. The ceremony was private, just the fathers, Hazel, Peter, and a few tight-lipped legal witnesses. No vows, no rings exchanged with trembling hands, just documents, signatures, and a silence that filled the room like smoke. Julian signed first, swift and practiced. When the pen passed to Arya, her hand trembled. She glanced at her father, he gave her a weak, proud smile, and she signed. Applause broke out, but it sounded hollow, echoing in a room where even the flowers felt like props. Let's see a kiss from the newlyweds. Hazel's voice rang out, too bright, too forced. Arya's eyes widened in horror. Julian stiffened. No, he began, but Everett Hale cut in. Come now, son. It's tradition. Julian groaned under his breath and turned to Arya. She stood like a deer caught in headlights, lips parted but silent. He stepped forward. She didn't move. His hand found her waist, firm but impersonal, and he pulled her gently toward him. Her breath hitched as he dipped his head, and their lips met. It wasn't a kiss. It was a collision. Barely a second long, barely pressure at all, but it set her nerves on fire. Her heart slammed against her ribs like it was trying to break free. He pulled back with a straight face. To tradition, he murmured, and turned away. Later, in the limousine that would take them to the Hale estate, Julian and Arya sat on opposite ends like strangers on a train. She stared out the window, trying to memorize the city's lights. He typed on his phone, disinterested. No words passed between them until they reached the massive estate gates. She gasped. The Hale mansion looked like something out of a dream. Gleaming white marble, towering columns, fountains dancing in the moonlight. It's huge, she muttered. Julian didn't glance up. It's a house. Don't romanticize it. They stepped out, greeted by a small group of staff bowing respectfully. Everett waited at the door, smiling like the proudest man alive. I'll let you two settle in, he said, shaking Julian's hand and hugging Arya gently. Welcome to the family, my dear. Arya nodded, unsure what to say. Inside, the mansion was cold in its perfection. Everything sparkled, polished floors, grand staircases, crystal chandeliers, but it felt sterile, like a gallery rather than a home. She tripped on the first step. Julian didn't reach out. She caught herself and gave him a look. Really? He glanced at her. You'll need to be stronger than that if you want to survive here. Her mouth opened, but she swallowed the retort. They reached the bedroom, a lavish space with floor-to-ceiling windows, a king-sized bed, and far too much intimacy for two people who could barely look at each other. Julian walked to the closet, changed into a fresh shirt, and tossed a pillow onto the couch. I sleep here. You get the bed. She blinked. Wait, that's kind of decent of you. Don't read into it. I just don't like sharing. He vanished into the bathroom. Arya sat on the bed, spine straight, hands clenched. When he returned, towel around his neck, hair damp from the shower, she stood abruptly. I'll change, she said. The bathroom was a sanctuary, warm, steamy, and for once, private. She changed into comfortable clothes and stared at herself again. I can do this, she whispered. 1 year, then freedom. When she stepped back into the room, Julian was on the couch, already pretending to be asleep. She climbed into the bed, heart pounding with exhaustion and adrenaline. But sleep wouldn't come. The silence between them was suffocating. She heard him exhale. "Don't expect anything from me," he said, voice flat. "I don't," she whispered back. "I won't change for you. I wouldn't ask you to." There was a pause. "You're not like the women I usually—" "I'm not one of them. I know." Another pause. "Just survive the year." "I intend to." Neither spoke again. And in that shared silence, a war began. Not with fists, not with words, but with hearts that had never learned to trust, and didn't yet realize they were already beginning to beat out of sync with the life they had always known. The first week of marriage felt like being locked in a glass box with a lion, one who ignored you most of the time, but might lunge at any second. Julian and Aria barely spoke. They moved around each other like strangers navigating a minefield, never making eye contact for longer than necessary. She spent her days in the library room Everett had graciously offered her, though Julian insisted it was to keep her out of his way, while Julian retreated to his office, the gym, or his late-night drives that ended who knew where. He returned smelling like whiskey, cigarettes, and sometimes perfume, though Aria never asked and he never explained. But silence had a weight to it, a kind of static that filled the space between them with unsaid thoughts, unwelcome tension, and too many stolen glances when they thought the other wasn't looking. Then came the charity gala. Everett insisted on their appearance, reminding Julian, "You're a married man now. The board needs to see stability, not scandal." Julian scoffed. "Dragging her around won't fix anything." "She's your wife," Everett snapped. "And if you don't start acting like it, I'll revise my wills so fast your bank accounts will think it's a tsunami." So there they were, inside a Bentley gliding through downtown traffic, both dressed in black. Julian in a bespoke tuxedo, looking like a carved statue, and Aria in a sleek gown of midnight velvet that clung to her curves and dipped low across her back. She felt elegant, regal, and wildly out of place. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, fidgeting with the hem of her dress. Julian didn't look up from his phone. "Just smile and stay by my side. Speak when spoken to. Don't say anything controversial." She rolled her eyes. "I wasn't planning on starting a revolution at a fundraiser. Could have fooled me." They arrived at the Bellevue Grand Hotel, where the paparazzi flashbulbs burst like fireworks. Julian stepped out first, as always, straight-backed and aloof, giving the cameras his signature smirk. Then he turned, hand outstretched to help her out. It was the first time they'd touched in public since the wedding, and as her hand slipped into his, she felt the temperature of the night shift, just slightly. Inside, the ballroom sparkled with gold and glass. Chandeliers dripped from the ceiling like crystal rain, and violinists played soft, sweeping music that somehow felt more like background noise than art. The city's most elite hovered in clusters. Senators, CEOs, socialites, all sipping champagne, all watching. Julian led her through the crowd with his hand on the small of her back, a touch so light it barely registered. Yet to Aria, it felt like a brand, one part possessive, one part protective, and entirely unreadable. "I hate these people," she whispered. "Good," he said without missing a beat. "Means you'll never become one of them." She nearly smiled. They stopped at a circle of men in tailored suits and smug expressions. "Julian Hale," one said, grinning like a politician. "And this must be your stunning wife." Aria extended her hand politely. "Aria Hale? Nice to meet you." "Lovely name," another man purred. "So, how does it feel to be the queen of Hale Tech's empire?" Julian's grip on her waist tightened slightly, but Aria only smiled. "I'm still figuring out where the throne is." The group laughed, clearly entertained. Julian arched a brow. Her response surprised him. As the evening wore on, Aria drifted from group to group, dazzling not with flirtation, but with wit, charm, and a quiet grace that softened even the most rigid power brokers. She didn't know finance, but she asked sharp questions. She didn't name drop, but when she spoke about books, travel, or politics, people listened. Julian watched from across the room as she laughed at something an ambassador said. Not a fake laugh, her real one. The one that crinkled her nose and tilted her head back slightly. Something about it made his chest tighten in an unfamiliar way. "Never thought I'd say this," Peter murmured, sidling up next to him, "but your wife's kind of, incredible." Julian scowled. "She's tolerable. Peter smirked. Sure, and I'm a nun. Before Julian could respond, a familiar voice cut through the music. Well, 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 isn't this adorable? They both turned. Standing there in a crimson gown that clung to her like sin itself was Lana Rivera, Julian's ex, current fling, and biggest regret. Arya hadn't noticed her yet. Lana, Julian said coolly, didn't know you were invited. Oh, please, as if anyone turns me away. Her eyes flicked toward Arya, now chatting with an art curator. So that's the wife? Julian didn't answer. She looks tame, like a substitute teacher who wandered into a Versace boutique by accident. Watch it, Julian said, voice low. Oh, relax. I'm not jealous. I just think it's cute. She twirled her wine glass. You, playing house with Miss Charity Ball. Then she raised her voice. Darling Arya, come here. Arya glanced over, confused but polite. She walked toward them, her smile fading slightly as she met Lana's eyes. I'm sorry, she said. Have we met? Not yet, Lana said sweetly. I'm Lana, Julian's close friend. Arya nodded slowly. Ah, nice to meet you. Julian stepped between them. We were just leaving. Oh, don't be rude, Lana said, grinning like a wolf. We were just getting to know each other. Julian's jaw clenched. Arya took a step forward, eyes steady. Actually, I've heard a lot about you. Lana raised a brow. You're famous for two things, Arya said calmly. Gossip columns and not knowing when to exit gracefully. Julian blinked. Lana's mouth opened, but no words came out. Arya smiled. It was lovely meeting you. Then she turned and walked away, heels clicking like gunfire on marble. Julian stood frozen for a moment before following. He caught up with her near the elevators, grabbing her wrist gently. You didn't have to do that, he said. She was insulting me to my face. I figured I'd return the favor. I've seen you take worse and stay quiet. Maybe I'm done being quiet. Julian searched her eyes. There was fire there. Passion. Not for him, not yet, but for herself, and for the idea that maybe she deserved more than the role she'd been forced into. He dropped her wrist slowly. Come on, he said. Let's go home. The ride back was silent again, but it was different this time. Not heavy, not tense, just thoughtful. When they arrived, Julian opened her door and even offered his hand, not because anyone was watching, but because he wanted to. She took it. Inside, he poured 2 glasses of wine and handed her one without a word. She accepted. They stood near the window, city lights glittering behind them like stars fallen to earth. You surprised me tonight, he said finally. Because I didn't embarrass you? No, because you reminded me who you were. She looked at him, puzzled. When we were kids, he continued, you were always bold, brave. You once punched a boy in the face because he took my lunch. Arya laughed softly. He deserved it. Julian nodded. He did. A pause. I don't hate you, you know, she said. He raised a brow. I just hate that this is how we came back together. A contract, a performance. He looked down at his glass. Yeah, he murmured. Me too. She sipped her wine. Maybe we can be civil, cordial. Is this a peace treaty? More like a ceasefire. Julian smirked. I can live with that. She turned toward the hallway. Good night, Julian. As she disappeared down the corridor, he found himself staring after her longer than necessary. He didn't know what this was becoming, but for the first time, it didn't feel like just a transaction, and that terrified him. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the towering windows of the Hale estate like liquid gold, casting a glow across the marbled floors and thick velvet drapes. Arya sat in the breakfast room, a book open in her lap, though her eyes hadn't moved from the same page in 10 minutes. Her thoughts were tangled with flashes of last night. The gala, Lana's venom, Julian's rare look of surprise, and the way their fingers had brushed when he handed her that glass of wine. It wasn't affection. She knew better. But it wasn't cold either, and that, more than anything, confused her. She snapped the book shut and stood just as footsteps echoed down the hallway. Julian entered in a gray suit, perfectly tailored as always, the knot of his tie centered with almost obsessive precision. His eyes found her instantly, and something unreadable flickered across his expression. He didn't offer a greeting, he rarely did, but he poured himself coffee and sat across from her in silence. She cleared her throat. I'm going into the city today. I need to pick up some things. Julian didn't look up. Take a driver. I was planning to. He sipped his coffee. She waited a beat. Do you always wake up this cheerful, or is today special? He finally looked at her. Do you always talk this much before 9 a.m.? A ghost of a smile played at her lips. Only when I want to annoy someone. Congratulations, he said dryly, setting his cup down. Mission accomplished. But his tone wasn't as sharp as usual. If anything, it felt lighter, almost teasing. Arya stood, grabbed her bag, and walked past him, but not before saying over her shoulder, "Try smiling sometime. You might not turn to stone." She didn't wait to see his reaction. Later that afternoon, after hours of running errands and visiting her father at the hospice center, Arya returned home exhausted. She found the house strangely quiet. No staff, no Julian, just the soft hum of the heating system and the faint scent of sandalwood in the air. She wandered upstairs toward her room, only to hear a voice from down the hall. Julian's office. She paused, uncertain. His voice was louder than usual. Not angry, but frustrated. "No, I told you. The Singapore deal has to be sealed by Friday, or we lose the entire South Asian wing." A pause. "I don't care if he's hesitant. Offer him double the equity if that's what it takes." Another pause. Then "No, I don't have time to deal with your PR mistake. Clean it up, or I'll clean house." He ended the call with a sharp clack and sighed heavily. Arya stood frozen outside the door, unsure whether to leave or knock. Before she could decide, the door swung open. Julian stopped short when he saw her. "Eavesdropping?" he asked, one brow raised. "I wasn't." She frowned. "Okay, maybe a little." He didn't seem angry, just tired. "Rough day?" she asked cautiously. Julian stepped aside without answering and walked past her into the hall. "I thought billionaires didn't have rough days," she added, following him. He didn't respond until they reached the stairs. "When you have everything, you also have everything to lose." Arya blinked. It was the most honest thing he'd said to her since they married. She followed him outside onto the back terrace. The sky was dusky, streaked with pink and gold. Julian lit a cigarette, something he only did when he was especially stressed. He leaned against the stone railing, exhaling slowly. "Can I ask you something?" she said after a long moment. "Depends. Why are you really doing all this?" He looked at her sideways. "Define this." "This contract, the performance, the effort. You could have walked away. You had options." He stared at the horizon. "My father gave me everything. All my life, I thought that meant I owed him my obedience. Turns out, it meant I owed him a legacy, and now I'm stuck chasing a future I didn't choose, just to prove I deserve it." There was no anger in his voice, just resignation. Arya stepped closer. "Is that why you always seem so guarded?" His eyes flicked to hers. "I'm not guarded, I'm realistic." "You're exhausted," she said softly, "and maybe a little lonely." He chuckled, but it sounded hollow. "Loneliness is a luxury. I don't have time for it." They stood in silence, the breeze brushing past them, tugging at her hair. Then, as if the moment had grown too intimate, Julian pushed away from the railing and stubbed out his cigarette. "I'm heading to the office. There's dinner in the fridge." "Thanks," she said, surprised. "He have the driver take you to the museum gala tomorrow night? Gallows night. I skelled meet you there. You there. You're still coming?" A beat of hesitation. Then, "I gave my word." And with that, he was gone. The next evening, Arya arrived at the gala alone. The museum was awash with soft lighting and soft music, the kind that made you whisper without knowing why. She wandered among the exhibits, pretending to admire a collection of 18th century oil paintings, but really, she was scanning the room for one person. He didn't show. Minutes turned into an hour. The speeches started. Her phone buzzed once. "Julian. Running late? Don't wait." She read it 3 times, then tucked the phone away. Just as she was about to leave, a familiar voice called out behind her. Well, if it isn't Mrs. Hale again." Arya turned to see a tall man in a navy blue suit, charming smile, champagne in hand. She recognized him from the Hale boardroom meetings. "Mr. Donovan," she greeted politely. "Call me Alex," he stepping closer. "You look breathtaking tonight." She forced a smile. "Thank you." "Funny," he said, swirling his drink. "I always assumed Julian would end up with someone flashier." Arya stiffened. "What's that supposed to mean?" He shrugged. "You just don't seem like his type." "I'm not, that's why it works," she said flatly. He chuckled. "Touche?" But then his tone shifted. "You know, if you ever get tired of playing the good little wife, give me a call." Arya blinked, stunned. "I'm sure I could offer better company." She opened her mouth, furious, but before she could speak, a voice sliced through the air like a knife. "She's taken." Alex spun around. Julian stood behind them, jaw clenched, his presence unmistakable even in the dim light. "Julian," Alex said smoothly. "Didn't see you there." "I noticed." Julian stepped between them, his hand finding Arya's waist with practiced ease. The gesture was possessive and oddly comforting. "Enjoy the rest of your evening," Julian said curtly. Alex gave a mock bow and slipped away. When they were alone, Julian looked down at her. "You okay?" She nodded, still stunned. "Sorry I'm late." "It's fine." They stood in silence. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. "Yes, I did." Her eyes lifted to meet his. There was something different about his gaze tonight, still guarded, but softer. "Come on," he said, offering his arm. "Let's remind everyone why they're jealous." She took it. The rest of the night blurred around them. More chatter, more handshakes, more fake smiles. But Julian never left her side. His hand was always somewhere on her back, her waist, her hand. It was all for show. Of course it was. And yet, it didn't feel like a show. Later, in the car, Arya watched the city pass in golden streaks. Julian sat beside her, scrolling his phone. "I'm proud of you," he said suddenly. She blinked. "What?" "You held your own. You're not just enduring this contract, you're owning it." She turned to him. That almost sounded like a compliment. He looked at her then, and for a brief second, the shields dropped. It was. And she smiled just a little. In that fleeting exchange, something unspoken settled between them. No longer enemies, not yet lovers, but something far more dangerous. Two broken people discovering they weren't as different as they'd thought. Rain lashed against the windows of the Hale estate, like the sky itself had lost control. Thunder echoed through the hills, rumbling deep enough to shake the walls. But inside, everything was quiet. Too quiet. Arya stood in the kitchen barefoot, wrapped in one of Julian's oversized sweaters, stirring a pot of soup she wasn't sure she'd even eat. Her father's latest test results were worse than expected. The doctor hadn't said it outright, but the message was there. His time was shrinking fast. Every second felt like a countdown, and she had no one to tell. She was married, yes, to a man with the emotional bravado of Arctic steel. But Julian, he'd been different lately. Slightly warmer, present, still hard-edged, still ruthless, but not entirely unreachable. The door clicked open behind her. She didn't turn. "I didn't hear you come in," she said quietly. Julian set his keys on the counter. "You weren't listening." "I guess not." A beat of silence stretched between them. "I went to see my father today," she said, her voice low. "He's worse." Julian didn't speak. "I don't know how to make peace with any of this. I sit beside him and pretend everything's okay, but it's not. I'm not okay." Still no response. She turned. "Do you even care?" His face was unreadable, but something flickered in his eyes just for a second. Guilt? Regret? She couldn't tell. He stepped forward, slower than usual. Less like a man entering a room and more like someone approaching a fragile thing. "I do care," he said softly. Arya stared at him, stunned. He continued, "I don't always know how to show it, but I do." "Then show me," she whispered. "Just once. Be human with me." The words cracked something open, not in him, but in the air between them. Julian moved closer, gently taking her hand. His palm was warm, steady. He didn't say anything poetic. He didn't offer promises. But his eyes met hers without flinching, and in that gaze she saw more than pity. She saw presence. That was enough. They stood like that for a long while, the storm raging outside while something quieter, more dangerous, brewed within them. Later that night, they sat by the fireplace in the library. The flames danced, casting shadows across the walls and flickering in Julian's eyes. Arya curled up in the armchair, clutching a blanket around her knees. Julian sat across from her, one leg crossed, glass of scotch in hand. "Tell me something real," she said. He looked up. "Like what?" "Something no one knows about you." Julian hesitated, then took a slow sip before speaking. "When I was 15, I ran away, for 2 days. Her eyes widened. "Seriously?" "I took the train out of Manhattan and stayed in some rundown motel in New Jersey. I had a stolen credit card and no plan. I just wanted to disappear." "Why?" He stared into the fire. "Because I hated my life. Hated the expectations, the pressure, the cameras, my father. I wanted to breathe without a script." "And did you?" "Not really. By the second night, I missed everything I thought I hated. The control, the certainty, the identity." Arya smiled sadly. "That's not weakness. That's being human." He looked at her. "What about you? Any confessions?" She thought for a moment. When I was 14, I was in love with you. Julian blinked. She laughed, blushing. You were this moody teenager who always protected me at the park. I thought that meant something. It didn't. You left and never looked back. I didn't forget you, he said quietly. What? You think I did, but I didn't. I remembered you every time I saw a chessboard, every time I heard someone laugh with their whole face, every time I drove past your street. Arya's heart slammed against her chest. Then why did you act like I didn't exist when we reconnected? Because you were too real, and real things are dangerous. She stood and crossed the space between them, kneeling beside his chair. So what are we now, Julian? Still pretending? He reached out, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. I don't know, he whispered, but I'm done pretending. His lips met hers, soft at first, then deeper, as if years of silence had finally shattered. It wasn't a kiss for the cameras or a contract. It was a collision of history and hunger, of grief and longing. They pulled apart breathless, eyes locked. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. That night, they didn't return to their separate beds. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't polished, but it was real. The next morning brought sunlight and silence again, but this time, it felt different. Warmer. Arya woke with Julian's arm draped around her waist, his breath steady against her shoulder. For a moment she just lay there, unsure if it was all a dream. But when he stirred and murmured, "You're hogging the blanket," she knew it wasn't. She turned to face him, smiling sleepily. "Good morning." He brushed his fingers across her cheek. "It is." They got up together, made coffee without speaking, moved around the kitchen like they'd always done this, like it was normal. But by mid-afternoon, normal shattered. Julian's phone buzzed, again and again. He answered once, twice, then finally threw the device down. "What is it?" Arya asked. "Stock breach. Someone leaked internal documents. It's bad." "How bad?" He didn't answer. Just pulled on a coat and headed to the door. "Julian," she said, catching his hand. "Let me help." He paused. "This isn't your world. Then teach me." He looked at her, really looked at her. Then, slowly, he nodded. They drove to Hale Tech together. It was chaos. Executives pacing, assistants crying, lawyers swarming like ants. Arya stood by Julian's side in the boardroom as he took control. His voice was calm but firm. "I want a list of all outgoing emails in the last 48 hours. We'll trace the leak. I want NDAs enforced, and I want our legal team to prep injunctions." Arya watched in awe as he commanded the room, but she also saw the crack behind his armor, how tightly he gripped the edge of the table, how his jaw clenched just a bit too long between orders. During a break, he pulled her aside. "Why are you really here?" he asked. "Because I'm your wife," she said. "And I'm not leaving you alone in this." Something in him softened. For the first time in years, maybe longer, Julian Hale felt what it meant to have a partner, not an assistant, not a mistress, not a competitor. A partner. Together, they faced the storm. It took 2 days, 2 sleepless nights, dozens of meetings, but the source was found, a disgruntled former executive looking to cash out. The damage was real, but not fatal. Julian handled it with swift, lethal precision. When it was over, he slumped onto his office couch. Arya curled beside him, their fingers laced. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do. I've made this harder than it needed to be." She smiled. "You're not easy, Julian, but you're worth it." He pulled her closer. "I don't deserve you. Maybe not, but I'm still here." And just like that, in the aftermath of crisis, something new had taken root between them. Not convenience, not necessity, but trust. The marriage that started with signatures and silence was beginning to look like something neither of them had planned for. Something dangerously close to love. The quiet between them was no longer laced with tension. It was companionable now, like a favorite song humming low in the background of a long, shared day. After the Hale Tech crisis was handled, Arya and Julian settled into a rhythm that neither of them dared define aloud. They still had separate lives, separate habits, but somewhere along the way, the invisible walls they'd built had begun to crumble. It started with the little things. Julian would pour a second cup of coffee in the morning without asking if she wanted one. Arya would leave sticky notes on his desk with reminders, sometimes about meetings, sometimes about nothing at all. "Smile more," one had read in loopy handwriting. He'd rolled his eyes but kept it in his drawer. Then came the day Arya stumbled upon a room she hadn't seen before. tucked at the far end of the east wing behind a door with peeling black paint. She hadn't meant to find it. She'd been searching for an old guest room to store some of her father's belongings. But something about the dust-covered knob called to her. Inside, the room was dark and stale, like it hadn't been touched in years. But sunlight spilled through a cracked shutter, illuminating an upright piano draped in a faded sheet. The moment she pulled it off, her breath caught. It was a vintage Steinway, the kind her mother had once dreamed of owning. She touched one ivory key. It moaned softly, off-tune but still alive. "You play?" Julian's voice startled her. She turned to find him leaning in the doorway, sleeves rolled up, his tie loosened. "A little," she said. "I used to." He stepped inside. "My mother played. She taught me a few songs before she passed." Arya blinked. "I didn't know your mother died." "She was sick for a long time. I was 12. "I'm sorry." He shrugged, though the motion was hollow. "My father locked this room up after she died, said grief didn't belong in a house full of ambition." "That's cruel. That's Everett Hale." Arya sat on the bench and pressed a few keys again. "It needs tuning. I can have someone come." "No," she said quickly. "Let me. I want to restore it." "It feels important." He nodded, then hesitated. "Thank you." She looked up, surprised. "For what?" "For wanting to bring something back to life, instead of burying it." That night, Julian stood at the doorway while Arya dusted and cleaned the piano, sleeves rolled up to her elbows, hair in a messy bun. She looked peaceful, rooted, like she belonged here in a way he never had. The next few weeks passed in slow, unexpected joy. They spent late nights talking on the terrace, wrapped in thick blankets, sipping red wine. Julian taught her chess again. He'd been her tutor once as kids, and Arya pretended to forget the rules just to hear him explain them, which he did with growing amusement. They fought sometimes, too. About little things. Julian hated when she left lights on. Arya couldn't stand the way he clipped his sentences when stressed. Once they'd argued over whether a dog should be allowed in the house. She wanted a golden retriever. He said, "No pets." "That's not a home, Julian, that's a museum." He scoffed. "It's an estate. Exactly, cold, quiet, and dead." And yet, the next morning she found a plush golden retriever stuffed animal sitting on her pillow with a note. Trial version. She laughed so hard, she cried. But with closeness came something neither could ignore. Desire. It built in small, trembling increments. A brush of fingers over the sugar jar, his hand resting too long on her back as they walked through the garden. The way she said his name, not like an obligation, but like an anchor. One night, after a fundraiser event at the Hale Art Foundation, Julian stood behind her in their walk-in closet, watching as she slid the zipper down her gown. Her bare back was to him, pale in the soft light. "Do you want me to help?" he asked, his voice rough. She nodded, barely breathing. He moved closer, slowly, hands grazing her skin as he pulled the fabric down. "Arya," he murmured. She turned, still half-dressed, meeting his eyes. "Yes?" Julian didn't answer with words. He kissed her instead, long, deep, and full of all the restraint he'd broken. They made love that night like people who'd waited too long and finally stopped pretending not to care. It wasn't desperate, it was reverent. The kind of intimacy built on vulnerability, not lust. They whispered things they couldn't say in the daylight. She ran her fingers through his hair and told him he wasn't alone. He held her afterward like she was something fragile and sacred. And in the silence that followed, Julian whispered, "I don't know what this is becoming." Arya smiled softly into his chest. "Let it become whatever it wants to." The following morning, she woke to find him still beside her, watching her with an unreadable expression. "What?" she whispered. "I'm trying to figure out what I did to deserve this." She kissed his shoulder. "Maybe it's not about deserving. Maybe it's just about being ready." For a while, things were golden. Her father's health, though still declining, had stabilized. Julian introduced Arya at board dinners with pride, never once letting go of her hand. He even took her to the small coastal town where his mother was buried, something he'd never done for anyone else. But shadows don't vanish. They lurk. One afternoon, Arya returned home to find Everett Hale in the living room. He stood like a statue, arms crossed, eyes cold. "I came to check on my son," he said flatly. "Julian isn't home," Arya replied, standing tall. "I didn't come to see Julian," Everett said. "I came to remind you of your place." She frowned. "Excuse me?" You're playing a dangerous game. Don't think I don't see it. The affection, the influence. You weren't meant to matter, Arya. You were meant to keep him compliant. Her blood went cold. You're saying you never expected this marriage to be real. It was never supposed to be anything but a tool. I'm not a tool, she said through clenched teeth, and neither is your son. Everett leaned in. You're nothing without this name. Without him. Don't get comfortable. She said nothing, just watched as he turned and left like a storm in a tailored coat. Later that evening, when Julian came home, she told him everything. His face was a storm cloud. He said that to you? Yes, I'll handle it. No, she said. We'll handle it. He looked at her, and for the first time, he truly understood what it meant to have someone on his side. That night, Julian made a decision. He called a board meeting. He confronted his father, and for the first time, he drew a line. This marriage is mine, he said, and so is this company. If you try to manipulate either again, you'll be removed. Everett stared at him, shocked. I'm not your puppet anymore, Julian finished. Afterward, he found Arya waiting for him on the balcony, hair down, wrapped in a soft shawl. Are you okay? She asked. He pulled her into his arms. I am now. She looked up at him. Where do we go from here? Julian smiled. Wherever you want. And for the first time, the future didn't feel like a cage or a cliff. It felt like a road they could walk together, side by side, unscripted, real. Snow arrived early that year. The Hale estate was wrapped in white, soft and untouched, like the world had paused for breath. Arya stood by the window of the upstairs study, watching the flakes tumble in slow, lazy spirals. She loved winter. The quiet of it, the stillness. It reminded her of the silence between piano notes, full of meaning even when nothing was said. But silence had shifted again in the house, and not the comforting kind. Julian had been distant lately. Not cold, but quiet, preoccupied. He stayed longer at work, canceled dinner plans, paced his office at night. When she touched him, he flinched, not physically, but emotionally, like he'd forgotten softness was allowed. At first, she gave him space. Then she started worrying, and finally she confronted him. It was a Thursday. Late. He'd just come home, looking exhausted, tie hanging loose around his neck. You're avoiding me, she said without preamble. Julian didn't even pretend to deny it. He just sighed, tossing his coat onto the couch. I'm trying to protect you. From what? He didn't answer. She crossed her arms. Julian, we said no more pretending. That includes pretending everything's fine when it isn't. His jaw clenched. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. Then help me understand, don't shut me out. He looked at her then, really looked, and something cracked in his expression. They're investigating me, he said softly. Arya froze. For what? Insider trading. Fraud. Someone leaked documents that make it look like I used confidential board information for personal gain. It's all circumstantial, but enough to damage everything I've worked for. She stepped closer, voice trembling. Is it true? No, he said firmly. I'd never do that. But when people want you to fall, they don't need truth, they need doubt. She felt the air leave her lungs. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't want you caught in the crossfire. Too late, she whispered. I'm already in it with you. He touched her cheek gently. I'm sorry. She leaned into his palm. What can I do? Julian hesitated. There's one person who might be behind this, but if I go after him, it could explode everything. Who? Peter. Arya blinked. Your best friend Peter? He's not who I thought he was, Julian said bitterly. He had access. He's ambitious, and I found out he's been meeting with my father behind my back. Arya felt her knees weaken. Everett's still trying to control you. He never stopped, but this time he used someone I trusted. She took his hand. Then let's find proof. Let's fight back, together. Julian stared at her, stunned. You'd really go to war with me? I married you, she said fiercely. Not for power, not for contracts, for this. For truth. For us. That night, everything changed again. They worked side by side like partners in a secret mission. Arya dug through emails, surveillance logs, internal reports. Julian called in favors, hired a private investigator, even met discreetly with a whistleblower. It was dangerous. It was exhilarating, and it brought them closer than ever before. Every night, they collapsed in bed together, exhausted but electrified. Sometimes they didn't even speak, just held hands in the dark, knowing they were fighting for something that mattered. But as the pressure built, so did the risks. One morning, Arya found an envelope on her windshield. No name. No return address. Inside, a photo of her and Julian kissing on the terrace. On the back, written in neat, cold ink, "Walk away or we bury you both." She showed it to Julian immediately. He stared at the photo for a long moment before tearing it in half. "They're bluffing," he said. But Arya saw it in his eyes. He was afraid. Later that night, he said something that chilled her more than the snow outside. "If this gets worse, I want you to leave. Go somewhere safe." She grabbed his wrist. "Don't you dare push me away. I'm serious. So am I. If we fall together." His eyes glistened, and for the first time since they met again, she saw tears. "I never meant to drag you into my storm," he whispered. "You didn't," she said. "I walked into it, eyes open." They kissed again, desperate this time, urgent. The kind of kiss that tastes like goodbye, even when no one says the word. 2 days later, the private investigator returned with what they needed. Emails, bank transfers, hidden accounts. Peter had funneled information to a shell company connected to Everett's offshore holdings. It was clean, it was traceable, and it was enough. Julian took the evidence to the board. The confrontation was brutal. Peter denied everything until the documents were displayed on the conference screen. Then he tried to shift the blame, tried to cry, tried to threaten. Julian didn't flinch. "I trusted you," he said coldly, "and you sold me out." Peter was removed from the board. Everett, though untouched legally, lost all influence. The new shareholders sided with Julian. His name was cleared, his legacy restored. But something inside him had changed. He came home that night and found Arya on the piano bench, softly playing a tune she'd written just for him. Minor chords, gentle rises, and a melody that sounded like hope. He stood in the doorway for a long time before walking toward her. She turned, smiling. "We did it." He didn't smile. Instead, he dropped to his knees before her, resting his head on her lap. "I don't want to lose you," he said. "You won't," she whispered, stroking his hair. "I've lived my whole life building walls. But you broke them." "Good," she said. "They were ugly." He laughed. It was soft and raw. Then he looked up at her, eyes shining. "Arya," he said, "I love you." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she slid off the bench and knelt with him, pressing her forehead to his. "I love you too," she said. And for the first time since they married, the contract between them didn't matter. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were choosing each other. Fully. Fiercely. Forever. The morning of their 1-year anniversary began quietly. No grand gestures, no staff bustling with surprises. Just sunlight falling through the window, warm and golden, pooling on the hardwood floor of their bedroom. Arya lay curled against Julian's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. It was strange to think how foreign this intimacy had once felt. Now it was home. She stretched slowly, her fingers tracing the edge of his collarbone. "Do you remember what today is?" Julian smiled without opening his eyes. "The day you became my biggest headache?" She laughed and lightly swatted his shoulder. "The day we signed our lives away, you mean?" His eyes opened, soft and amused. "It was the best deal I ever made." There was a pause, then he added more seriously, "and the only one that didn't come with a clause for exit." They got up late, made breakfast together. Julian tried, disastrously, to cook pancakes, and Arya ended up doing most of the work while he read out loud from a recipe book with the enthusiasm of a drama student and the precision of a child. It was the kind of morning that didn't need documenting to be remembered. Later that day, Julian surprised her with a drive to the countryside. They stopped by a lake, frozen now, rimmed with pine trees dusted in snow. In the back of the car, he'd packed thermoses of hot cocoa and her favorite cranberry scones, a plaid blanket, 2 folding chairs. They sat in the stillness, sipping and smiling. She rested her head on his shoulder. "This time last year," she said, "I didn't know what I was walking into." Julian nodded. "Neither did I. But I'm glad I did." He took her hand and kissed her knuckles. "So am I." There was a kind of peace between them that only comes after war. They had fought for trust, for truth, for each other. And they had won, not just against the world, but against themselves. But fate, as always, has a taste for irony. 2 days after their anniversary, Arya received a call from the hospice center. Her father had passed away in his sleep. The world fell silent again. She didn't cry at first. She didn't speak. She just sat on the edge of their bed, holding the phone, staring at the floor. Julian found her like that, and without a word, he sat beside her, wrapped his arms around her, and held her until the dam inside her broke. The funeral was small, intimate. Rain fell softly over the cemetery as Arya stood under a black umbrella, her gloved fingers curled tightly around Julian's hand. She wore her father's favorite brooch on her coat, a simple gold swallow in flight. After the service, Julian guided her home, helped her out of her coat, and made her tea. She said very little, but when she finally spoke, her voice was hoarse. He never got to see this version of me, the one who isn't afraid. Julian brushed a strand of hair from her face. He would have been proud. She looked up at him, eyes wet. Are you proud? Every day. That night, she sat at the old piano and played for a long time. Julian watched from the doorway, his chest tight. The notes were slower now, heavier, but they were healing her, note by note. Days passed, weeks. The holidays came and went in a blur of lights and laughter and gentle grief. Julian hosted a quiet New Year's Eve dinner, just the two of them and a few friends. Arya wore a red velvet dress and toasted to the year that had made her a wife, a fighter, and an orphan, all in 12 months. At midnight, Julian kissed her with so much love it made her knees weak. In the early days of January, as the snow began to melt from the rooftops, Julian called Arya into his office. I have something for you, he said, handing her a manila envelope. She opened it slowly. Inside were documents, legal, official. Her eyes widened. You're dissolving the contract? He nodded. We don't need it anymore. What we have now, it's not conditional. She blinked, overwhelmed. This means we're free. He took her hands in his. Free to choose each other. Every day. No obligations. No pretending. Tears welled in her eyes. I choose you. I choose you too, he said. Again, and again, and again. They signed the papers together, this time not as business partners but as lovers, equals, soulmates. That night, he took her to the rooftop of Hale Tower, where strings of fairy lights swayed in the wind and candles flickered in jars along the railings. A small quartet played quietly in the corner, their breath visible in the winter air. In the center of the rooftop stood a small arbor wrapped in ivy and white roses. She turned to him stunned. Julian. He smiled, nervous for the first time. The first time we got married, it was for everyone else, for contracts, for legacy. But this time, I want it to be for us. Her hands flew to her mouth, eyes wide. Will you marry me, Arya? He asked, pulling out a ring. Simple, elegant, sapphire and diamond. She burst into tears, laughing as she nodded. Yes, 1,000 times yes. They said their vows again under the moonlight. No audience, no cameras, just two hearts whispering their promises into the night. I promise to fight for you, not against you. I promise to be your calm in the storm and your fire in the cold. I promise to love you. Not because I have to, but because I want to. And with each word, the past fell away. When he kissed her again, it wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. Love, real love, doesn't arrive in a perfect package. It doesn't always begin with sparks and symphonies. Sometimes it starts with paperwork, with mistrust, with cold hands and colder hearts. Sometimes it looks like a contract, a compromise, a trap. But love, when nurtured, grows beyond the walls we build to contain it. Julian and Arya taught us that intimacy isn't found in grand gestures but in quiet loyalty. That trust isn't a gift, it's earned, protected, and tested in storms. They showed us that even the most broken beginnings can bloom into the most unbreakable bonds if you're willing to fight for each other, not just stay beside each other. Their story wasn't about perfection, it was about choice. Every single day they chose to stay, to soften, to share the weight of their past and the hope of their future. Through grief, betrayal, loss, and healing, they stood not just as husband and wife, but as partners, warriors, lovers, and friends. In a world obsessed with speed and spectacle, their slow-burn journey reminds us the most powerful love stories aren't the ones that sweep you off your feet, but the ones that teach you to stand taller, stronger, and more whole with someone beside you. So if you're in a chapter that feels uncertain, don't walk away too soon. Sometimes the most beautiful beginnings are hidden inside the endings we never saw coming. Where are you watching from tonight? Drop your city or country in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to Hanfuk Tumhon for more heartfelt journeys like this. Let love find you, even in the most unexpected places. In a world where relationships often begin with filters, conditions, and unspoken agendas, Julian and Arya's story reminds us that love doesn't always enter quietly through the front door. It sometimes crashes through the back window in disguise. What started as a contractual arrangement turned into one of the most powerful transformations two people could ever undergo. Why? Because they allowed themselves to grow individually and together. Their journey shows us that love isn't about perfection. It's about presence, about showing up even when it's messy, even when it's hard. It's about breaking down walls you thought were protecting you, only to find they were keeping you from truly living. Real love is not measured by grand declarations or flawless moments. It's in the small things, the way someone waits for you in silence, the way they remember your favorite tea, or how they stand beside you when the world turns against you. It's in the decision to stay, not because you're trapped, but because you're finally free to choose, and you still choose each other. More than anything, this story teaches us that healing is possible, that trust can be rebuilt, that even in the darkest winters of our lives, love can return like spring, quiet, persistent, and full of hope. So if you're in a chapter of your life that feels uncertain, cold, or unfinished, take heart. The story isn't over yet. Now it's your turn. Where in the world are you listening from? Drop your city or country in the comments. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow for more emotional healing journeys just like this one. Let's keep writing stories that matter together.